So I know people right now are sleeping on this conflict going on in West Africa with the Niger coup. Um, I'm hearing a lot of nonsense from Western media. Um, the narratives honestly don't even make much sense. So I think this story is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Um, this has massive implications in the world. Uh, there are four West African countries who have overthrown their uh, French sympathetic puppet governments, and you have a real revolution bubbling up in West Africa right now that is spreading across the continent. And they are trying to get out of trade deals with the EU and the US that don't help them at all. And they like to trade with Russia and China, so they can get actually fair value for their resources. Because right now they're not. Right now the EU is capturing the bulk of the value of African resources, and it's not going back towards the people. Um, the country in question, Niger, is the second poorest country in the world, um, and they're one of the top five producers of uranium. They export an incredible amount of gold and other natural resources that are very, very lucrative. Um, but that money is not going back to the people. And this story is all over Africa because it's the same setup. There are former colonies who are still under economic control from the colonizers. Even if they're on paper independent, it's not real. They've had to sign numerous agreements, treaties that basically keep them in a colonial status, but they just change the name to independent. But one thing that I'm finding, it's hard to get a lot of information on this because there's so much, especially not if you're not from Africa, which I'm not. I'm not from West Africa. I only got people there. So all I can do is go off of what I'm reading and what I'm hearing from people. And so you're going to hear a lot of garbage. You're going to hear a lot of nonsense. But right now, what's getting me through this is just focusing on what are the interests. Okay? People are going to make it sound like it's super complicated and oh my God, there's so many geopolitical things and there's so many moving parts. It's really not. It's only complex if you want it to be complex. The first thing, the country of Niger, they want to be independent. They want to control their own monetary system. They want to control their own trade. They want to benefit from their natural resources. And right now they're not benefiting from those. The coup leaders who overthrew Bazoum in Niger and the coups in Burkina Faso and Mali, those were supported by the local population because they know that they are overthrowing a puppet government. And it's not being covered like that. It's being covered as these Africans are rejecting democracy and they're rejecting the rule of law. So I want you to think about that language right there, the rule of law. And where have you heard that before? And what type of language, who says that about who? Okay? Because we hear that a lot from the red caps over here in the States, talking about law and order, things of that nature. It's the same exact energy. But, so understand, France's interest is they're trying to remain in control of these colonies because they're making a lot of money off these. I'm talking they're eating off these colonies right now. There's close to like 500 billion that flows from Africa to Europe every single year, right? It's one-way traffic. That money will come back, about a fifth of that money will come back in the form of aid, which is a loan given to the Africans from their own money. Because that's another funny thing they don't tell you about. These countries are required to hold 50% of their foreign reserves in the French treasury. And if they want some of that money back, again, this is their money. If they want some of the money back, they can borrow it at commercial rates. Their own money. And this is under the guise of, we're just trying to help you. We know you have a problem with corruption, and someone's going to steal this money, so we're going to protect it for you. This is kind of what the logic is. So these countries want to get out of there. Clearly, France wants to keep that. You're talking about if France is a person, this is their main job. Capturing exports from Africa is their main job. And they're eating off it. And if they, I'll put it like this, if they lost control of West Africa, they're no longer a world power. They're just a small, random European country. So France has every incentive to repeal this coup and regain control. And right now they are trying to frame it as they're there to help, and their Bazoum was this democratically elected leader that the people wanted. And so these people engineering the coup are rejecting democracy. And I want you to think about it a lot, okay? The idea that if you have an election, that's democracy. There's no other way to achieve democracy without having an election. Okay? And what they don't tell you about this free and fair election was the dude only got like less than a quarter of the votes. It wasn't a lot. And there was a lot of controversy about these elections. But let Western media tell it, there was no controversy. It was undisputed. It was a free and fair election. These people are just, they're lawless and what have you. Okay? So France wants to remain control and keep their cash cow going. The U.S. just installed a $100 million drone base in Niger. They have another base that the CIA uses, right? This is central to Africa Command. The U.S.'s mission in Africa centers around this drone base. And this is America. They're trying to gain influence in Africa. Right now, they don't have big influence in Africa. It's the Europeans got there first, and they're still eating off that. And in the last couple of decades, China and Russia have made massive investments. And they are starting to win over the favor of African countries because they're offering more than the West is offering them right now. China and Russia are building roads, building hospitals, building infrastructure, something that the West has refused to do. We have 30, 40 years of structural adjustment programs and all these programs to develop Africa, and it hasn't happened. You ask yourself why that hasn't happened, right? And then ask yourself how much money has been extracted in that process. While they struggle to have to develop Africa, they haven't struggled to develop their businesses that they develop in Africa that only benefit them. But I digress. So the U.S., they're in a tricky spot because they're not really saying they're with France, but they're sympathetic interests. And what their concern is, because France already got asked to leave Niger. And the concern is America's next. There has been no word about them telling Americans to leave yet. But there's this uneasy tension right now where the Americans aren't calling it a coup. They're uncommittal. France is calling it that. And we're all waiting to see what's going to happen next with that. So the U.S., they've invested a lot in Bazoum and getting him to this point. And one thing you're going to hear a lot about is the reason there is a coup is because the president was going to fire Chiani, the leader now of the government. He was a part of like the National Guard, and so the rumor is that because he was going to cut their pay and fire this guy, that's why they had a coup. Okay? In reality, he was going to cut military spending in Niger because they were outsourcing it to the Americans. And they were trying to sell it as this is a socialist guy who's taking money from the military to put it towards education, right? Mind you, it's bullshit. You don't have to have an either or, okay? But the second thing is the whole point of them doing that was them being dependent upon the American military. That was the whole idea. And so with this coup happening, that threw the whole plan out. And now the State Department said that if it came down to it, they'll have to vacate that base. $100 million base, over $500 million investment over the past 10 years, trying to get in Niger, because again, they're trying to get a foothold into Africa that they really haven't had in the past. So it's in their interest for the former president to be reinstalled, because the coup leader, they're not interested in dealing with the West like that. They want a new relationship. And then you're going to hear a lot about Russia influences a Russia-backed coup. Okay? And number one, it's, I feel it's low-key racist, because there's this assumption that Niger has to choose between being colonized by France and the US or being colonized by China or Russia, when China and Russia aren't saying anything about that. And this is something that I was skeptical about in the past, but look into it, okay? Russia and China have non-interventionist policies. Okay, you can talk about Ukraine, you can talk about Taiwan. I'm not going to hold you on that. I'm not going to say these countries are perfect, they don't do anything wrong. But they're not doing what the West is doing right now in Africa and Latin America, where they have essentially enslaved these countries until they have to work for them. The bulk of their GDPs are going to paying down debts to the West, who are investing in Africa to develop. The only thing they developed are runways for their planes, roads for their trucks, power plants for their facilities. Nothing for the people. No jobs for the people. They're not. They don't pay taxes. So the people in the living there get no benefit from this stuff. None. But it's constantly framed like the U.S. and France is aiding these countries. And so even now, after this coup has happened, there's sanctions now on Niger, and they're talking about they're cutting aid, thinking this is going to help. This is going to force these countries back in line. Now, just think for a second. What are they being offered by Russia and China right now? They're offering to help develop. Putin just forgave $25 billion in debt to several African countries. Where's the West offering that? You'll have Western reporters talking about how China is building hospitals in Africa and saying that's a bad thing because it's Chinese influence. But they don't understand from their perspective in Niger. They don't care if it's Chinese, American, French, or Russian. They want a good deal. They don't want your aid. They want to help themselves. And right now they can't, because there's these parasites who are sucking all the money out of them. And this is the thing that people need to understand about Africa. It is poverty-stricken. It is rife with corruption. Okay? But the thing you need to understand is that corruption is a feature, not a bug. Who does that benefit? Again, go back to the interests of all those parties involved. Who benefits from instability? The multinational corporations who are extracting resources. And while the country is unstable, You have EU, French, American troops protecting those business interests. So they don't give a fuck if you're over here arguing and fighting amongst yourselves over in the desert. Just stay away from our mine. Stay away from our plant over here. And who was there to audit them and saying, hey, you're not paying taxes. These aren't fair trade deals. Who are you going to talk to? And the crazy thing is, there has been a history of coups in Africa and in Latin America. But the cool part about it is the bulk of those coups were for the interests of foreigners. Anytime someone starts talking that stuff about we're going to use the resources for ourselves and we're going to unite with Africa, any people starts talking that talk, they get them out the paint. And so it's ironic that these last 4 coups, the West is trying to paint them in that same light. But again, go back to the interests. These coups are fucking with French. They're fucking with the U.S. right now. And they're saying that these are Russia-backed coups. Okay? And the reason why they're saying that is because after this last Niger coup, the French military threatened intervention. And in the history of warfare around the world, when people get threatened, what do? They find allies and they ask for backup. So who is going to ask? They ask Russian militaries who are in there because they need help against these people. And that's in the interest of Russia because Russia wants access to the resources. They want a trade partner. And people are acting like it's the same thing. It's not. Right now, Niger is exporting a lot of gold every year. Billions of gold. Nothing's coming back. You want to talk about aid? The gold is coming from their land. What aid do they need? They need your hand out their pocket so they can feed themselves and develop themselves. But you're going to see in the covering of this story, they will keep pushing this instability angle and terrorism angle because they don't want to talk about the real money. They keep wanting to act like France and the U.S. have this burden to uphold these countries and give them aid, make sure they have food and whatnot. Okay? And they're the reason for the poverty in the first place. So this is kicking off right now, and it's not all sweet because honestly, what I see right now, this is very, very serious for the West. If this were to spread, and you did see a united Africa who doesn't have to trade with the West anymore, they can get fair value for their resources. Niger can send that gold to Russia and get grain back. Get technology back. Russia is talking about skill transfers, sharing technology, actually developing together. And again, not in some utopian stuff. It's in both of their interests. But they can't do that right now because France controls the region. Like we had, I think it was like last year before, Mali had a deal to exchange some gold for some grain, and France cut it out. They made them sell the gold to them to get their colonial francs, and then they can use that to buy the grain. And when you do that, by the end of it, you're getting pennies on the dollar. Because the bulk of that wealth was captured in Europe. But this is good. Well, this one longer than I thought it was going to go. But I'm gonna make some more content around this because there's a lot. There's a lot of moving pieces here and a lot of repercussions and a lot of history that you need to give yourself the proper context. Because it's been a lot. It's been a whole lot right now, um, and I'm still learning. I'm still going. So it's going too long. Tap in. Uh, I'll be back.